All right. So, hi everybody. I'm Dimitar. I'm going to be talking about how Blender is used within architectural design. So, I just want to talk a little bit about me so you have a familiarity with the kind of concepts that I'm going to be presenting. So, I'm a architect registered in the US with an MArch from the AA school in London. I did the DRL program with Patrick Schumacher and I did my BArch in Philadelphia. I run UH Studio and the Associated Design Academy. You can find me on youtube.com/uhstudio. And I currently work as a designer at HOK in London. And we typically deal with large projects, mixed use, towers, sport and entertainment, cultural, and urban design. And I tend to get involved a lot in the concept design phases. And I also do tend to to be the design lead in all phases of some projects as well. So, Blender. What Blender offers, I think we all know it probably in this meeting what it offers, but essentially poly modeling, non-destructive modifiers, animation, rigging, video editing, VFX, rendering, and but what's important for architecture design is poly modeling, non-destructive modifiers, and some of the animation techniques. So about polymodeling, we in Blender the polymodeling toolset is quite extensive, so it's very useful for architecture design, and it functions quite quickly and efficiently to create pretty complex massings. Subdiv is amazing. It's a mixed world between pure polymodeling and NURBS modeling because we can still have a rough mesh and do some amazing stuff with a pretty rough mesh. So for me, it's actually like digital sculpting. Um, and modifiers are quite important as well because they allow us to quickly produce pretty complex things without having all the time to go through Grasshopper. So for me, it's kind of the halfway point between explicit modeling, like in Rhino, and parametric modeling, like in Grasshopper. So this is something you can find the video actually on YouTube, and it's something that I did in 10 minutes, and it's only using modifiers, so it's completely non-destructive workflow. If we want to take that to the next level, we can use the excellent add-on called Tissue to produce a facade completely in Blender as well. And oops, so these are some iterations and tessellations done with Tissue. Some more. And actually, I thought I've presented this project before, but I thought because this is online and whoever's paying attention is probably a little bit more wants to get a little bit more in depth, so I can do a quick demo of exactly how this project works. So for information, it started as in Blender. This is the initial sketch for, so it's for a facade for an arena, and then I modified a series of elements in Blender to get the right sort of massing, for which the lines were exported, the bottom, the middle, and the top, and then the rest is done in Grasshopper. So I'm going to jump over now and show you. Right, so this is the sort of model. So it's kind of baked already, but essentially we get this. So from here, I go and I select, in the case that I did what I was doing there, I exported 3 edge loops, and here they are isolated. And then the next step was to bring them into Grasshopper. So let's see if I can turn off the actual composition and show you how easy it is to actually work in between them. And that's important because within architecture, many people know Rhino and Grasshopper, but not many people know Blender. And it can actually be used very seamlessly and be added as an extra step within the architectural design process. So if we get these curves, so you can see these are slightly different curves. I actually was looking for it, but I couldn't find the right massing uh, that I used in this Grasshopper definition. Anyway, so here are the 3 curves, and then we play with them a little bit. And then all it is a series of subdivisions in different parts of the model to get our structure. So for example, you can see here, this is the bottom bit. This is sort of a translucent element, and it's subdivided in 2 ways. One, I was trying to experiment whether it goes directly down and it's more horizontal and directly vertical. And actually, this highlights one element why it tends to be quite important to go through Grasshopper, even if we're using Blender, because if we're doing this completely in Subdiv, we're going to end up with something looking like the thick pipes that end up over here, which is not necessarily the way that we would build something. We usually would go vertical. So we can use the surfaces, the meshes that we get from Blender, and then interrogate them further in many different ways, like with intersections within Blender, or in this case, like I'm showing within Grasshopper. Right. So then we have horizontal bands. So different ways to address that. Or in this case, see if I find it, we have sort of an even subdivision of frames constructed from 3 points, right? So a point along the top curve, a point along the middle curve, and a point along the bottom curve. So this sort of shapes the structure of the panels on the facade. And then along with that, we have some actual patterning. And you can see those are like nicely and evenly subdivided between those. And I won't show the whole process, but essentially what we end up with is something like this. So you can see how easy it is to go from one process to the other. Now, going back to the presentation. Yeah, so tissue is the other important thing, and it's really easy to get started with. So I actually thought, let's go and do a complete concept together. I don't know how much time I have. I think I should have enough. So I've prepared a file already. So we got this file here. So what I did is I went and downloaded an image from Google Photos. This is Paddington Basin. It's right next to Paddington train station, which is the main train station that you take if you're in case you're coming into London from Heathrow. And I cycle past here every day during non-lockdown times. It's been a while now, but within it, I thought, okay, there's a couple of sites with some old buildings that I've been looking for quite a while, and this area is up and coming. But what if we take one of those and we do something crazy? I mean, in reality, maybe the mass will be quite different, but for the purposes of doing something fairly quickly, this is what we can come up with. So, first thing to do is start with a very simple mass. And I always like to work with mirror sites so we have as few vertices as possible. So I'm going to add a modifier. Make sure we're mirroring around the correct axis. Get rid of this edge. So it's just a shell because we're only concerned with the facade for this step. All right, so now we can just extrude this. Maybe it will be helpful if I turn on some hotkeys. So you can see exactly what I'm doing. And yeah, so this is really what I love about using Blender in my workflow daily, is that once we have a simple box, we can go ahead and just drag and drop vertices to start to give our massing some shape. Maybe we add a loop cut somewhere, and maybe we pull some of these vertices back, and maybe we want to sort of address the fact that it's going maybe quite high, and we don't want it to block all the light for everything around it. So we want to make this slightly thinner. The same with the bottom. Maybe we want to make this slightly thicker when it comes down. So I'll grab some faces and I'll just move them out ever so slightly. And if it looks too alien, that's okay, because we can always just go and drag some of these vertices. And if you want to make it smooth, we can always subdivide it. So I'm going to add the subdivision modifier. And if it's too smooth, and let's increase that to 2, let's go and make some of these. Let's make him sharp. So if we crease them, they become something like this. And we can play with the shape as much as we want, and it's an architecture design is an iterative process. We never get it right from the first time. That's why we usually need a tool that's really quickly and helps us iterate through various designs as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's say we're kind of happy with this design. I'm not very happy, but I think it will do for the limited time. So once we have this, oh, I see I made it much taller before. Let's see, how tall is this building? Let's apply the scale, go back 40 meters. It's all right. Let's make it a little bit taller. Why not? Let's go to 50 meters. And yeah, as you can see, we can constantly tweak things to make it look right. I mean, with some of the more intricate masses, that's the most important thing, is how do we sculpt this in a beautiful way that looks good with all the angles and it works well with the necessary program. Right. So now that we have a simple massing, we can do a number of things. We can export, let me just duplicate this. Let's move this out of the way. So I'm going to apply all the modifiers. All right. So we're left with a mass like this. So we can actually extract all these lines, bring them into Rhino, into Grasshopper, and create a very smooth surface. I mean, when we're doing towers, it actually is very easy because all we're doing is lofting between all these surfaces. So it's a very easy process. The way to do that is to it's Control Alt and click to select an edge ring, and then we would go to Select Loops, Edge Loops, and then Control I to inverse all the horizontals, X edges. And now we have very nice and clean vertices. So if I export these now, I just want to make sure that I put this back in the center. File, can see it. File, export, OBJ. So there's different ways to work in between Rhino and Grasshopper. OBJ is the simplest way. Just call it N3. Make sure selection only is clicked. And now if we open the model in Rhino, so I have a little starter pack. Turn everything off. And then I need to find this now. Tower. And 3. Okay, so here are our lines. Now in Rhino, they come as simple lines. So if we select all of them, Control J to join them, they're simple lines now. Now so to remake this surface, I have a script here set up, but it's actually really simple even with the new scripts. If I go and select curve, now the only important thing is to make sure that we select all these in order. And I usually with massings like these, we don't even need to work on both sides because it's symmetrical. It makes everything a little bit easier to work with. So set multiple curves. We select these in order. Oops. All right, and now we would loft. And usually there's some errors because some of these are going backwards and forwards. I won't go through it, but there's a very simple way to get rid of that, which is basically drawing a curve somewhere and then using that curve to see where this is as a guide that flips all the curves. This may already be getting a little bit too technical. Let's see now. Flip curve. Oh, these are going the wrong way. Anyways, it does work. I'll show you actually in the already built up script. So if I go in here now, let's see where this go. Plug this. It may take a second to build up, but in this way, we can actually leverage some of the advantages that we have with this sort of really nice computational phase. And we get first a nice surface that if we want to, we can even bring into Revit now, and we can also do different things. Like, for example, the shape changed quite a bit, but I can show you in a better example here. Some of these lines, so some of these tessellations. And then if when we're ready, we can actually bring it back directly into Blender. Now, the other thing that's also quite important with architecture is that we have nice subdivisions for panels. So if we look at this um, massing, yes, it's nice. But if we look at, let me look at a baked version of it. So if I copy it and apply all the modifiers, right? So in reality, we would never get a window that looks like that. So we need a different way to create our windows. So what I do usually in Grasshopper is I use these lines the exact way that I showed you, and then I subdivide them in such a way that, let's say, I think in here I have a half a meter height, and these are 4.2 meters. So you see, we actually get less and less panels the higher we go up in the building. That makes sure that our facade actually works in regards to having proper sizes for paneling. Once we have this, we can then use tissue. So let's duplicate that here. And I have some panels here which are very simple. So if I click this element and this element over here, and we go to tissue, tessellate, and all of a sudden, whoops, that went in the wrong direction. We have something that looks very nice and very convincing. And as you can see, this workflow is fairly fast. And if I go back to the presentation, and I use it everywhere, actually not in these first two examples, not here either, but here. So both of these maskings were done with tissue and with subdivision. In fact, you can see that this one is not subdivided properly. I did leave it just as the mesh subdivision, which goes down. In this case, it was more of a stronger effect that I wanted to accent how this element really comes down and comes up. Um, and in here, this is a simple mesh, so this comes directly from Blender. It's actually done all within Blender. And this is something completely different. So well, let's talk about that actually a little bit as well. So this is a house, and if you ask an architect how long it takes them to design a house that they think they'll live in, they'll tell you forever. So this is kind of, I think I started in 2017, and I go on and off. It was something that was started with um, the golden ratio. So each room is uh, if you imagine the golden ratio of the square and the little rectangle, the relationship between one of the large rooms with one of the smaller rooms everywhere is that sort of golden ratio relationship moving with it. However, doing this only in Rhino in plan and then bringing it up in Blender and thinking about more the proportions of space, not just in plan, but in all proportions, really helps me design faster. um, I'm not very good at rendering, so this image took me a long time, and I don't think it's ready in any shape or form yet, but it is a design tool that helps us visualize space much quicker. This project was really fun one, and I talk about this, talked about morphing. Right. So I want to talk a little bit about the resources that are available for architectural designers that wish to use Blender. So there's a Facebook group called Blender for Computational Design. And if you search for it on Facebook or if you type this URL, you'll find it. And in it, you'll find a lot of links that are relevant to with relevant courses and videos. And then there's a fairly new website called community.osarc.org, which is headed by Dion Mote in Australia, who writes a wonderful plugin. It's called BIM plugin for Revit, actually. So it plays really well with some other open source tools like FreeCAD. And then there's also UH Studio, which is my website where I post tutorials as well as on YouTube. I just want to show you a little bit about the Facebook group because it's becoming quite an important part of sort of thinking about Blender and architecture and computational design community. And you can see some of the images, some of the questions that are being asked. Some of them are more artistic. A lot of them are still quite architectural. So the discussion is quite good and quite fruitful and relates to how we can push Blender within the architecture community to create better designs quicker and more iteratively. So that's it for me. Thank you all for getting up early or late wherever you live in the world. And I do have a course. I've been planning this for a long time. I think I'll finally get a chance to do it in a few months. I would need to have a specific number of people that are kind of committed to it, at least on a mailing list. So I know I'm not wasting my time. So if you do happen to be interested, you can sign up for it with using this code here. Thanks again.